Does one precede the other, or are they just an exact equilibrium? Are we looking for exact balance between poetic and scientific knowledge?
I think I can answer your question.
Oh, man. If there were one at this table who could.
Sure.
Yeah.
Welcome to Classical Etc. You are in the studio with Memoria Press.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Classical Etc. I'm Jessica Abood, and I'm here with Martin, Paul, and returning guest, Mr. Ian Galloway. Ian, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to be here.
Ian's on the print production side of the Memoria Press team.
That's right.
Ian, what are you working on now? You are a very busy man.
Yeah, we're very busy. Curriculum manuals are our big thing at the moment because they are something we update every year, not always with substantial changes, but at least with corrections, tweaks to scheduling, things like that. Always takes a little bit of time right now. So we're working on it.
Okay.
We're also doing a lot of printing in-house now these days.
Yes.
And so that's been something that we're gearing up and getting better and learning about and having fun with.
That's wonderful. Well, we appreciate all your work.
Thank you.
It's one of those jobs that if it's not right, everybody knows it. But if you do your job well, nobody even knows you're there.
No one needs to know who I am. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, thanks for all you do, Ian.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, as you know, Ian, we usually start the show by asking everybody what they're reading. Do you have anything on your
I'm
book
currently
stand?
reading Paradise Lost,
Okay.
which I've just started. So I have no opinions about it other than I'm very much enjoying what I'm reading so far.
Okay.
But I'm only into book 2. So not a whole lot going on at the moment other than Satan's trying to leave hell, which is fascinating.
Oh.
So
That's disturbing.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Martin, how about you?
You know, I was sitting here thinking, I never anticipate this question on every show. I never think about it. Something because I've been working on, we did the show on the digital delusion, and now we're doing on this. So I've been working on these. I haven't been reading much else. But I was sitting there, and I have a copy of Raymond Chandler's one of the Philip Marlowe books, The Big Sleep, I think, sitting next to my little thing on the couch, a little table, and I'm thinking I gotta get back to that, but then I'm in the middle of too many other books probably right now to get back to that. So we'll see. But I love Raymond Chandler's prose. It's that gritty 1940s Los Angeles with corrupt Hollywood, and he's trying to investigate all these people, and he keeps running into these mobsters here, and there's something about that noir that I love it in film, and I reading. So that's what I've been anticipating reading at this point. After all this.
So now this is no longer a section of what are we reading, but what will we be reading?
What do we aspire to read?
Aspiring reads. Well, we did a whole episode on that.
Yeah, we did.
Do a whole
Our
episode
reading
on
list
that.
for 2020. So
So
perfect.
this is a perfectly valid way to approach this.
That's right. Paul, how about you?
I am making my way back through Climbing Parnassus. It's been a long time since I read that, so I'm going back through that. And Martin, in a moment of folly, I took Martin's advice to try the #1 ladies detective agency.
Oh, but you don't like it?
I just started listening to it, and I've read one chapter or listened to one chapter, and so far she solved one case. So maybe we're on a good trajectory. It does remind me so far of The Unexpected Mrs. Polyfax, which was a series that started coming out in the 60s. She wrote, I think, at least into the 90s, but it wasn't like one of these. Dorothy Gilman maybe wrote The Unexpected Mrs. Polyfax, and she only put one out like every 2 to 3 years, something like that. It wasn't one of these authors that's cranking them out, and so there's not a whole lot of them, but it feels similar in sort of the speed, the tone, what's going on. And so if it's like that, I would enjoy it because I like Miss Polyfax.
Yeah, just in defense of #1 ladies detective agency, the author, and I think maybe we talked about this on a previous show, he does write a tremendous amount. I mean, but he cranks it out But when you're listening to that story, it's almost meditative.
Yeah, you don't get the impression that he just cranked it out.
Mhm.
It is slower. It feels slower.
Mhm.
That probably has something to do also with the narrator, just the way she is too.
And the culture. I mean,
But,
it's a more rural culture.
Yeah. So
Keep us updated.
it'll be interesting.
Okay.
Something to listen to, not something to.
Yeah,
I wouldn't sit down and read it.
the reader is so good that I think that adds to the book.
Yeah, I don't think it was on the air, but you played a clip of her reading, and it's
beautiful,
lovely. Yeah.
Right. And in fact, it surprises me that it's written by a male.
We talked.
Because he's in the mind
That,
of, but the second chapter is he's in the mind of a
Of
male
her dad, I think.
her father.
Yeah, that's right where we were gonna. I was getting into. So
Interesting.
I may not love that, but jumping back and forth from two omniscient perspectives.
Yeah, it's
I don't know
weird
that
at
I love
first,
that.
but you see why she's doing it.
Yeah, well, I'll see.
Okay. Well, on to our listener question that's going to give us today's topic, actually. This is from Camille. She wrote us at our podcast inbox, podcast@memoriapress.com. Just to plug that, we do love to hear from you. So questions, comments, suggestions, please write us. This is what Camille says. She says, I'm a homeschooling mom of small children. I've been hearing a lot lately about poetic knowledge and its importance, particularly in the early years of a child's life and education. I find that a lot of curricula that emphasize poetic knowledge focus heavily on the child's experience of whatever they're studying and focus less on teaching or relaying specific knowledge to a young child. She goes on to ask several really good questions about poetic knowledge. Is it compatible with other styles of learning, and how does it all work together, and is there an appropriate age to use it or not use it? So Camille, excellent idea for a topic and excellent questions. We wanted to answer your questions and maybe even more. Poetic knowledge is a term that, if you're familiar with classical education or in those conversations, you've probably heard about it before, but people have, I would imagine, different ideas about what it is, or maybe they're new to the term altogether. So Martin, I want to start with you and ask, what does poetic knowledge mean and where does that come from?
Well, I think the term is meant to distinguish a certain kind of sort of literary way of looking at the world, which tries to avoid the rationalistic, right? Because, we live in a sort of post-Enlightenment age. And, there was a whole period there in our history when we were, we all became very scientific and rational and in a sort of mechanistic sort of way. And I think the poetic knowledge, thought or, even movement, if you want to call it that, is just pushing back on that tendency to over-rationalize everything and to think that that behind the important thing behind everything is a mechanism of some kind. We think there's ways that people think that are dependent upon kind of what's going on in the culture. So before the mechanistic age, things were organic. People thought the world was basically some kind of organism, right? That's like an animal or a plant. And then the machine comes along, and we start thinking of everything in terms of a machine. That what the universe is fundamentally is one big vast machine. And so the poetic acknowledgement, I think, is, and that comes well into our own century, I think, and we still, I think, thinking now it's turning to digital. That the computer is now the thing that we're thinking of everything in terms of. We refer to ourselves as my hard drive's full or something like that. That's the metaphor that we see everything through. And so I think this is a pushback on that, to say that, we need to start thinking in non-mechanistic ways and more poetically as opposed to rationalistically.
And I think a different way to maybe phrase this, and getting back to Martin's comment about being post-Enlightenment, is sort of like, I think poetic knowledge is trying to put the focus back on humanity as an incarnate soul, right? That we're body and soul, and not pure soul, right? Because Plato thinks of, and all the ancients really, that knowledge is a power of the soul, right? But then if you separate that from our bodily reality, then you want to understand things in a certain way, as opposed to James Taylor's book Poetic Knowledge will refer to like the awe or the admiration or the amazement that we get when we perceive something. But we're perceiving it actually through our senses.
So would like poetic knowledge and then like the science-based or scientific knowledge are two ways of knowing and experiencing?
Yes. And I mean, the way I like to think about it is, generally speaking, poetic knowledge would be understanding the whole before its parts, and scientific tends to understand the parts in order to try to understand the whole. And so, this is something that when I was teaching our intro to philosophy course, and I push back on the students, because all the students are kind of growing up with this idea of, I can understand what a tree is if I understand the atoms that make it up. And I'm like, no, you can't. You look at the tree, there's something about that tree that is different than just the sum of its parts, right? It's not just a bunch of atoms, but there's a form there that you're able to comprehend, and you should be able to sit there and look at that in awe. And that's what I think the case is they try to make about poetic knowledge.
So are the two modes pitted against each other? It seems like they could work together very beautifully if what you're saying about embodiment is true, which we would probably say it is. So are they against one another, or is there a world where we need both?
I think that the concern among the people who sort of came up, who have emphasized this idea, is that there's an imbalance, right?
Okay.
It's not that there's one and not another, or it's just that we have become off balance, that we have emphasized the matter as opposed to the form way too much, and in a sense also oppositely,
right,
not enough, because the poetic knowledge is also more concrete and less abstract. There's sort of
there's a way in which it's more abstract. There's a way in which it's more concrete. Right. But I think that's a charitable reading, Martin, because it seems that the massive push is towards poetic knowledge and denigrating scientific knowledge. And so the charitable reading of that is he's doing that in order to bring it back into balance.
I see. You have to overemphasize it to kind of try to, I see. Okay.
And so I think there is actually a risk in going too far the other way. Right. Okay. Where
you create another imbalance.
You create another imbalance. And so there has to be.
Yeah. But just remember that this sort of, the whole idea of poetic knowledge and the time at which it became something that was discussed was the 1950s. And we were still kind of mired in much more so, I think, than now in the older mechanistic mindset. So there was very definitely an imbalance there on that side. So I think that's what it's a lot of cultural intellectual movements are responses to something. So I think that's what it's a response to.
And that's helpful context in terms of like how it emerged. I think where it emerged within like the cultural moment. I think that's helpful. Paul, you mentioned the James Taylor book that its title is Poetic Knowledge. And Martin, I know you knew James Taylor and you've read this book. You've got it marked up inside and out. What do you think? What do you think about it?
Well, this is one of two books that I think sort of exemplify the movement. One is The Death of Christian Culture by John Senior, and then there's Poetic Knowledge by James Taylor. Yeah, I did know James, and he taught at the Online Academy, our own online academy.
Remember you saying that?
Yeah, for a little while.
Yeah.
But the book has been criticized for being very turgid in its presentation, very sort of mechanistic, ironically, because but that's because it comes from a doctoral dissertation. Doctoral dissertations are not.
No, they're not
apparently,
poetic.
Adorned.
They're not
They're
poetic.
they're not adorned.
Non-poetic. And so if you want an explanation for why that is, that's what it is. It's a doctoral dissertation. But it was put out as a book. Poetic Knowledge, The Recovery of Education is the subtitle to it. And I think, Paul and I were talking about this the other day, and I mentioned that one of the problems with the book is that it's advocating a way of thought that is somewhat at odds with the expression of that thought in this book. Because
Right.
it's very sort of, what's the word?
It's analytical.
Well, that's
It's
the
it's very
tension.
analytical.
That's always the tension when you talk about this
that's
kind
right.
of thing.
Yeah.
You do so in a way that's analytical, at least in the Western kind of philosophical, linear logic sense.
Yeah.
It's analytical. So
Yeah, so it's kind of ironic, but
Yeah.
Right.
But I understand. I've read some of the criticisms by people, and I can understand that it is sort of hard to understand in parts. It's a little overly academic, and has the kind of prose that apparently people who read doctoral dissertations like. I don't know, but it's so it is a little bit hard to read, but I think there's a lot of great things in it.
If you're trying to understand that moment,
you're trying
where
to-
he's
yeah.
coming
Yes,
from, how it
absolutely.
emerged, where it, yep.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I appreciated about the book is because we talked about the imbalance and the extremes. One of the criticisms of the book is that it lends itself towards an overly romantic approach to education. And right at the very beginning, he's like, this is not meant to end up in romanticism. I'm really trying to root this in a realist philosophy and Plato and Aristotle. I mean, and he attributes the term poetic knowledge to Thomas Aquinas. And it's like, Thomas mentions it in two very, very passing ways. Like, it's not like it's developed. So I think it's, he may make a mountain out of a molehill on that one, but he really is trying to root it in realism and not romanticism, which I appreciate, right? Like, it's not, he's not trying to say, throw out all the hard work that you're doing, but you need to make sure that you're also giving students this opportunity to sit and wonder at creation.
Yeah, there is, I think the tension here is between the rational and the imaginative. We're human beings, and we have kind of a rational, scientific way of thinking, and we have an imaginative, literary way of thinking. You can make that's a valid distinction. And this is a theme really even within classical education, is that we need to read more literature. I mean, that's why we do this, is because we agree with him on this, that we need to bring this balance back, so that we're not just thinking that science is about truth, but literature is not about truth. Literature is very much about truth. Sure. It's just trying to grasp it more intuitively or imaginatively, because that's part of what we are as human beings. And so I do think that's something we do talk about a lot. We don't say poetic knowledge when we talk about it, but that's what we mean. Poetic knowledge, I think, most fundamentally just means bringing back that feeding the imagination of our students is hugely important.
Well, I'm glad you ended on that note, because I want to bring it now to the classroom and how it does play out with students.
I was making notes about that.
Really, Paul?
I really was.
Oh.
I also wanted to tell Ian that if he wants to jump in anytime, because Martin and I could talk nonstop.
I do have a question, but I think we're getting there. So I'll let you go first, and then if we don't, I'll jump in.
Yeah, please jump in, Ian. So I would love to hear from you. How does expressions of poetic knowledge appear in our classrooms today? Is it being neglected? Maybe I am misunderstanding, but I hear a lot about different school districts having to cut things like art, music, different fine arts programs. Does that mean we're kind of cutting back on students' experience of the training of poetic knowledge in the classroom? Am I misunderstanding it altogether?
Well, one of the things that I hear from parents when I go to like an opening of one of our schools or something, and they'll tell me why they bring their kids there, they don't read books.
Books, okay.
That I'm sending my child to, and I said, well, have you asked about it? They said, yeah, they don't have enough money. They spend 4 times what we're
on
spending
iPads?
on it per child, and they can't afford books. It's the strangest thing. Maybe there's other things we're spending our money on that we would be better put to the use of buying books.
And specifically, would poetic knowledge say it needs to be imaginative literature?
Well, okay, I think
is that
I was just talking to my wife about this morning. I was taking her to the airport. She's just tired of me. I know.
We're all going to the
airport. going to visit relatives. And I was telling her a book I had been reading and how when you're reading a book of imaginative fiction, a story, that this often what the author does, it's in this book that Paul and I were talking about, we're in the mind of a person. So we're thinking their thoughts with them. And we're seeing the world through their eyes. We need to do that. We need to have that experience of seeing the world through other people, particularly a good person in literature.
Right.
Because when I think about, how did I develop morally and imaginatively, it's because of the books I read. And I was in other people's minds and I learned how they thought. And these were good people. And so I know what it is to be a good person because I've been in their minds, and that's not an argument for goodness or being a good person.
Mm-hmm.
That's just experiencing being a good. It's intuitive,
yes. Right?
And that is hugely important. It's absolutely essential, and that's one of the big reasons why literature is important. And we need to be, just plying our kids with all kinds of these great stories.
Yeah,
I remember when I was in 8th grade, I had a class where we went through the theological and cardinal virtues, but one of the things we did was attempt to define them. Right. Which the teacher, he had been trained in Thomistic thought, like he had a definition ready, but part of it was us working it out because we had grown up on stories and we knew what justice was.
Because you'd seen it.
Because we'd seen it, but we couldn't define it. Right. And I think that's what this idea of poetic knowledge is coming to, is that you can know what these things are, but not be able to define them. And if all of our work of education is saying, no, like you don't know it until you define it, like that's probably a disservice to the way we as humans know. However, I would say, like when we're talking about novels, right? Like I think it's not just in novels, right? Like if you go to a 3rd grader and say, we want you to understand the beauty of ducks on a pond, right? Poetically, we say the best way to do that is read Make Way for Ducklings, right? There's another option, which is say, okay, you're going to have a textbook and you're going to learn about the ecosystem of the pond and how the duck fits in that and whatever. And then you have the other option, which is go to the pond, right? And so you kind of have 3 options here, and here, I would advocate that you shouldn't choose one of them, right? You do as many of those as you can, right? And so the idea that, because I think our listener asked, what she asked, does the mode of learning compatible with a didactic style of teaching and relating knowledge to the child? So what I would advocate is that you aren't just... when you're saying you want to teach poetically, you can teach poetically by taking them to the duck pond, right? They will see it. They will interact with it, but if we restrict ourselves to that, only people who live in Florida, the southern United States, are going to know what is it alligators they have down there?
Yeah.
It's alligators. Know what an alligator is, right? Because
Experientially.
That's their only option is to do it experientially, right?
I've seen them in South Carolina too.
Holy smokes. Okay. That's a little too close to me for comfort. And so you've got that option. You could read a book about it, about a story, right? And that's going to evoke a certain emotional reaction to it. It's going to evoke this imagination of what does this look like? And because when you go to the duck pond, you're not seeing the travails that the mama duck went through to find a place to nest and all that stuff, but you do find that out and make way for ducklings, right? But then in some ways following that up with like, let's learn about the ecosystem. Let's learn about what the lily pads are doing and the algae is doing and the fish and all of that sort of comes together.
That's helpful to me, Paul, because maybe it's just my small brain understanding, but when I first was hearing about the experience, poetic knowledge presented more as an experience, that seems really unstructured. And I could hear people saying, yeah, but even from our perspective at our schools, we are very structured.
Yep, right.
So it's almost like, well, we can't be hypocritical, but you're saying they're almost like shades or tiers of expressions of poetic knowledge in any, like the duckling example.
Yeah, like you can go see the duckling or you can read a story about the duckling and they're still going to give you some sense of poetic knowledge. And even reading about the ecosystem can give you an experience of poetic knowledge if you stop and contemplate it, right? Yeah. If you allow yourself to be wowed by what that thing is, that is also part of the definition of poetic knowledge, right?
So this gets to the question that has been in the back of my mind as we've been talking about this, because we keep using terms like they're not in balance. Is there a hierarchy to these modes of knowing? Does one precede the other, or are they just an exact equilibrium? Are we looking for exact balance between poetic and scientific knowledge?
I think I can answer your question.
Oh, man. If there were one at this table who could.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so important distinction in learning, in education, is the order of learning in the order of knowledge.
Here we go again.
Yes.
If for longtime listeners, we've heard this about 3 times, but let's do this.
So, in the order of knowledge, what is the most important thing philosophically, right? But in the order of learning, which thing do you do first? Right. Now, I think that poetic knowledge and, rational knowledge are probably about, evenly important, but a child has to start with the concrete. A child can't start with abstractions. He starts with things, and then later on in his education, he learns the abstractions, right? So I think that's why in the book Poetic Knowledge, there's a lot of discussion about the wonder of children, right? So I think,
and is that their expression of poetic knowledge? Is fostering wonder in a little one? Yeah. It's not necessarily okay.
Yeah.
So that's how it. Okay.
The amazement at existence.
Yeah.
And this is to me the chief and most valuable quality of children's literature is this sort of metaphysics of amazement. This idea that the world is a wonderful, amazing place, and that you need to try to instill that attitude in children. And I think that's I think part of what he's saying here in a more rationalistic way. But I wanted to mention an experience I had. It was a senior trip at another school I worked at before I came here, and so I took these 5 or 6 kids up to Chicago, and we went to the Field Museum, and it was very interesting to me because the Field Museum, most museums have taken out all of the nature displays that they used to have. When I was a kid growing up and going to the museum in Los Angeles, you'd go and it was all set up just like, and then there's a squirrel in the tree, and then the lion over here is going to eat the squirrel, and and so.
I think those live in 2 different ecosystems.
I had the same thought.
Yeah, it was a strange museum. And so, But
The
now
60s
there's
were
all
an interesting
technology, and it's set up for school children. They come in and push buttons and do all, that's all. But at the Field Museum, they still had all of those old nature displays. And I remembered seeing there were these school children coming in, and these were inner city kids. And they're looking at these displays in just wonderment. Because they had never seen anything like that before. Right? And so to me, that experience alone is worth so much for them just to see what nature is really like, because they've never seen realism, and you have to start there. That is the starting place. It's just the experience. You're making another distinction. This 3-part distinction now with the actual experience, with the reading about that. But I think it does start with actual experience. But then for a lot of kids, the book is like the Field Museum. They're not going to experience it.
They're not going to have an opportunity to experience it. Absolutely. But I also think that that sort of experience is most appropriate, basically up through kindergarten, right? I mean, you see a 1 or 2 or 3-year-old, like the world, everything is amazing to them. And other than when they're throwing temper tantrums, right? But if you can spend that time giving them as many experiences as possible, you're setting them up to actually know as much as possible about all the world and their surroundings. So I do think it's dependent, right? Where, you have an 8th grader who, it's time to learn physical science. Well, I mean, the hope is that they've seen something fall from a high distance, and they've, thrown something and see how it falls to the ground, and they've experienced acceleration and all that. So, okay. So now we can talk about all that stuff because we're just assuming you've done all of that. So I do, it's not like no poetic knowledge needs to be acquired after 6 years old. But I do think when we're talking about, like, that is the unstructured time of your life.
Yeah. And one of my favorite memories is, we lived, when my kids were younger, we lived out in the country. We had a couple of acres here, and there was a creek, fairly big creek, that ran through our backyard. And my kids, I remember just one day, there was a neighbor boy too, and they were, I just walked out the back door, and there they were, and they had their pail and their fishing rods and barefoot, and just walking down to the creek, and they would be gone for half a day. And I just remember thinking, that is the way a child should grow up, precisely for this reason, because they're going out there and they're having and my second son, who just always loved animals and nature. And one day he takes me down to the creek, and he says, let me show you where the crawdads are, and we'd go there. Let me show you where this is. And he had mastered that creek. He knew everything there tangibly, in a completely concrete way. And that is the place to start. And of course, a lot of people don't have that, and which is why you take your kids to the zoo or some nature preserve that's putting on a program of some kind.
And why also you read them a bunch of books.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And the books sometimes that are just compendiums of like facts about nature, sometimes those, I mean, there's some interesting things in there, right? And a kid might sit there and look at it for a few minutes or whatever. At some point, though, what's going to capture them more is a story about those things, right? We just read Wind in the Willows, right? And like, there's some things about Toad and Ratty and Mole and that are completely consistent with the idea of what a rat is, what a mole is, but by reading the story, that gets imbued in a different sort of way than if you were just to read that, badgers live underground.
Right.
So,
well, and the other thing too is there are, and I don't want to push TV too much, but the nature shows they have on Blue Planet and some of those things are so well done. I mean, it's amazing.
Human
when I was
Planet.
growing up, it was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, which came out right before the Walt Disney Hour, and these grainy sometimes I think it was black and white at one point. They're going into Africa, but just But now the camera,
you get so close.
They have to pick some of this stuff up. Yeah. And my second son, I mean, he watched The Crocodile Hunter. He was going to be the crocodile hunter when he grew up. I mean, and that's such a healthy thing for kids.
One of the examples that James Taylor gives in the Poetic Knowledge book about older students and poetic knowledge is the classroom where they couldn't take notes and they just had to listen.
Yeah, that was so. The book by John Senior, "The Death of Christian Culture," that is written by one of the professors,
James Taylor's professors
at the University of Kansas. It was called the Integrated Humanities Program. It's got an acronym that people know by IHP. That was the program that this came from. Taylor was a student there at some point, but I still meet people. Bishop Conley was in that program. Met him at a conference last year, and that affected a lot of people. And they had to go to these lectures by these three guys. I can't remember the other two guys' names, and everyone would have to put down their paper and pencil and listen. And they would listen to the conversation about some book or some poem or whatever between these three professors. And that's an interesting idea.
But it was also a conversation,
yes,
not just a lecture at them.
Okay. Right. Yes.
Right. And that's what we do when we get together and discuss something, right?
Right.
It's just, I've jotted some things down in this conversation because I'm like, ooh, I don't want to forget that point. But I'm not like sitting here taking notes about what Martin's saying or what Ian's saying.
You should be.
No, I shouldn't be per poetic knowledge.
Right.
But I think the danger there is to think about, okay, then like, how do you apply this in a freshman high school classroom?
Right. Yeah, that was going to be like, my last question would be, how do you pull this off, or should you?
Yeah. I mean, I think a good teacher is balancing both the time that they're spending in lecture, which is, it's information coming at you quickly, and time where you're discussing that, right? Where, okay, now I've got this information. Now what of it? Let's deal with it, right? Let's contemplate it. Let's sit there and wonder at it, right? I mean, one of the best conversations we had my second year, which was teaching the philosophy class, which was a class full of people who didn't like to speak. And, one of the students asserted that fish know they exist. And, so we're in sort of this analytical philosophical thing, but like we ended up in this big discussion about it. It spilled over into the lunch hour, but I wanted them to contemplate what does it mean to know that you exist, right? And you have to sit there and look at the fish. What is the fish doing? How does the fish interact with people? Is he self-reflective? And that sort of argument, nobody was taking notes during that argument, but passions were inflamed, and we were coming to the truth of something that they have not forgotten, right? And so I think you're going to balance both times where, okay, you need to understand what a universal is. You don't understand what a particular is. Let me explain that to you. Okay, now let's discuss this and work with it. And I think also the domain itself, the subject itself, is going to determine some of how you're going to teach it, right?
Well, and part of this, I think, is done at the earliest levels with reading aloud to children. Yeah. Really any stories, but there's some stories that, where it's somebody in the context of the natural world, and those kinds of things are particularly good. But I think that just reading aloud to kids and then talking about it, like Paul's talking about, and that goes all the way up and, even into high school, where you're maybe reading something together in class. Now they know how to read well, so you go around the room and then you stop. There's some particularly interesting point that the author made, and so you're going to stop and you're going to ask some questions about that. And so all to get to the point that you need this going on up here. And one of, the good ways to do that are by looking at something together and asking them to think about certain things.
And asking them to imagine.
And asking them to imagine certain things.
Where there is...
you're engaging that.
You're engaged. Yeah. Like, don't just skim over what's being said. Stop and picture the ducks on the pond, right? That is a worthwhile activity in a classroom. I do want to bring up languages, though. What's poetic knowledge in a language context, right? If what we are wanting them to do is, from a poetic perspective, is hold apart, and we're teaching a grammar-based Latin, which is part to whole, right? Where does that fit? And I think the struggle there is, up through 5 years old, where the brain functions in a particular way, where it's just soaking up information. That's how we master our mother tongue, right? Or tongues. I mean, a child can master 3-4 languages in that time, just by being in it. But then when we're talking about learning after that, our brains don't work that way, right? And so when we're learning, like, the goal is to reach the poetic version of the language where you're experiencing it as a whole, right? Not only do you know the grammar, you understand the culture, you appreciate the stories being told in the language and everything, but I think with language, you do have to approach it from part to whole.
This is exactly where I hoped we were going to get to at some point, because this has been my own experience. Because I went to seminary, I learned Greek, Hebrew, and I've learned some other languages since that require just deep grammatical work. Now, as an adult, I can kind of approach that learning a little differently. I mean, I do sometimes I can process the information faster. I can kind of apply some other language learning methods that we don't generally do because we're grammar-based approach here. But when I got to a high level, for instance, Hebrew class in Isaiah, I was doing just exegetical work all the time, just analyzing the text, translating it. But then our discussions in class by my professor, if you looked around the room, we were just lifted off our seats in wonder every time he told us something fascinating or beautiful, something we hadn't seen before in the text.
But that you could see it because you've done the hard grammar work.
And this, this goes to something I was thinking about too, is that there's a sort of 3 stages we go through, right? Yeah. I mean, there is that original poetic stage, till age 5, where we're just wondering at the world, and we're just knowing we're finding out the names of things, and then we get into that rationalistic stage where we're taking Hebrew classes, and then you get the professor who does that, and you now then have to go back and reawaken the wonder. And this is what half of Chesterton is about. Yeah, is he's doing that. He's had this great education and everything, but his writing is it's like this reinvocation of the wonder of the world.
That's right.
So.
And it is a reawakening.
It is a reawakening.
There's you have to do it. Yeah. It's not just. It's not going to just happen. You have to do it. You have to be kind of re-enchanted, I think.
And you have to see the value in it.
Yeah.
Right. But for some reason, and I just feel like I need to say this, but this is calling to mind Eslin's book, The 10 Ways to Destroy the Imagination of Your Child. Which, if somebody's interested sort of in cultivating imagination, it's a worthwhile text.
Good resource.
Yes.
Well, great discussion. Camille, I hope that we answered your questions. Thank you so much for writing us. It was an excellent topic to take on, and we appreciate your email. If you out there have any questions for us, you can email podcast@memoriapress.com. We'd love to hear from you. And I think that's it for now. Ian, thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
During a busy season. We appreciate it. Yeah. And thank you, Paul and Martin. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time. Thanks for joining us today on Classical Etc. by Memoria Press. If you like what you heard, Please like, subscribe, or share this episode or comment. We love to hear your questions and your comments. If you want to learn more about Memoria Press, please go to memoriapress.com. This has been Classical Etc. We're so glad you joined us, and we'll see you next time.